They found cheese on a mummy's chest. It was 3,600 years old. It did not look like food anymore. It looked like dried clay. The desert that preserved it sits in one of the most remote places on Earth, the Shaohe Cemetery, also called the Small River Cemetery, Western China. The discovery was made in the western reaches of China, a region most archaeologists had overlooked. Archaeologists first reached it in 2003, after decades of failed expeditions. What they found inside the coffins was unlike anything ever excavated before. The coffins were shaped like upside-down boats, wrapped in cowhide and buried under the sand. Baskets, combs, and carved wooden masks were found alongside the bodies. The dry desert air had mummified the bodies naturally, without any embalming. Their skin, hair, and clothing survived intact for over 3 millennia. But the most surprising discovery was not the bodies themselves. Even the leather of their boots survived. The desert air had stopped decomposition almost entirely. It was what someone had placed on their chests before burial. Small lumps of an unidentified substance were found on the necks and chests of multiple mummies. The excavation team collected the samples and sent them for laboratory analysis. For years, no one could definitively identify what the substance was. Initial chemical tests were inconclusive. The substance had degraded beyond simple visual identification. Researchers tried infrared spectroscopy, gas chromatography, and elemental analysis. Each method revealed fragments, but no definitive answer. Some thought it was butter. Others said it was dried milk or ritual paint. Then, in 2014, a team led by Andrei Shevchenko applied a technique no one had tried before. They used proteomics, the study of ancient proteins preserved inside the samples. Proteins survive far longer than DNA in dry conditions, sometimes for tens of thousands of years. The proteins told them exactly what the substance was. It was cheese. The protein signatures matched those of fermented dairy products, specifically kefir cheese. Kefir cheese is made by fermenting milk with a specific combination of bacteria and yeast. The fermentation process also adds beneficial bacteria to the gut, making the cheese both nutritious and easily digestible. The ancient samples showed the same structural characteristics as modern kefir. Someone made cheese 3,600 years ago and buried it with the dead. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. Contamination from modern bacteria would have destroyed the results. Every precaution was taken. Who were these people? Why did they bury cheese with their dead? And what could the cheese itself reveal about their way of life? The analysis required technology that did not exist when the cheese was first discovered in 2003. Next-generation sequencing could now extract genetic information from samples that would have been impossible to analyze even a decade earlier. In 2024, a new team pushed the analysis even further. A team led by researchers at the Chinese Academy of Sciences extracted ancient DNA from the cheese itself. Not human DNA, bacterial DNA, the microbes that had fermented the milk into cheese. They found the genome of Lactobacillus kefiranofaciens, the key bacterium in kefir fermentation. This bacterium is still used today in kefir production around the world. The same species that made your breakfast yogurt made cheese for Bronze Age nomads. The daily rhythm of milking, fermenting, and drying cheese defined their entire way of life. But the ancient bacterial genome was not identical to modern strains. The ancient strain had fewer genes related to lactose metabolism. Each lost gene represented an adaptation to human-controlled environments over millennia of dairy farming. Over 3,000 years of human dairy farming The bacteria had evolved alongside us. We domesticated the bacteria just as we domesticated the animals that produced the milk. The people of Shaohe were herders. Their survival depended on their animals. Their clothing was made from sheep and goat wool, dyed with plant pigments. They milked their herds daily, but fresh milk spoils within hours in desert heat. Cheese solved that problem. It turned perishable milk into food that could last months. Kefir fermentation requires no rennet, no complex equipment, and no specialized knowledge beyond the starter culture. You simply add kefir grains to milk, wait, and strain the result. The technique is so simple that it could be taught in a single demonstration and remembered for a lifetime. The kefir grains themselves are a living culture, passed from batch to batch for generations. Some kefir cultures alive today may descend from strains thousands of years old, but the Shaohe mummies held another mystery that the cheese helped solve. The mummies did not look like the surrounding Chinese populations. Some had light brown hair, others had elongated faces with deep-set eyes. For decades, scholars debated whether they were European migrants or local people. Early DNA studies suggested Western Eurasian ancestry, fueling theories of ancient European migration. The Tarim Basin sits at the crossroads of every major Eurasian trade route. The Tarim Basin would later become a critical junction on the Silk Road, connecting China to Rome. Even within the same cemetery, burial customs varied. Some mummies were wrapped in cowhide, while others wore only woven wool. But these people predated the Silk Road by at least 1,000 years. Their world was far more isolated. It would have been a natural meeting point for populations from every direction. But in 2021, a landmark DNA study rewrote the entire narrative. A study published in Nature analyzed DNA from 13 Shaohe mummies directly. The results showed these people were not European migrants at all. They were genetically isolated, a population that had been there for thousands of years. Their DNA traced back to an ancient population called the Ancient North Eurasians, a group that split from other Eurasian populations during the last ice age and left almost no modern descendants. The ancient North Eurasians contributed DNA to both modern Europeans and Native Americans, but left few direct descendants. These were not travelers. They were remnants of one of the oldest populations in Central Asia. Their European appearance was a genetic echo from the Ice Age, not from recent migration. Despite their genetic isolation, they had adopted advanced dairy technology. The cheese proved they had contact with herding cultures, even if their DNA showed no mixing. Technology travels even when genes do not. Ideas cross borders that people never cross. The archaeological record confirms trade connections through pottery styles and metal tools matching distant cultures. Material culture moved freely across the steppe. Genes did not always follow. The Shaohe cheese represents an intermediate stage in dairy technology, more advanced than simple yogurt, but less complex than aged hard cheeses. They learned to make cheese from neighboring cultures without ever intermarrying with them. The spread of kefir technology across Central Asia predates the Silk Road by at least 2,000 years. Isotopic analysis of the cheese revealed what kind of milk was used. The cheese was made from a mixture of cow and goat milk. This tells us they kept mixed herds, a strategy still used by Central Asian nomads today. But the biggest question remained: why bury cheese with the dead? The cheese was not hidden or stored. It was deliberately placed on the body as part of the burial ritual. Other grave goods included bundles of ephedra twigs and wheat grains, all provisions for an afterlife journey. The cheese was food for the dead, a final meal for whatever came next. The bacterial DNA was fragmented into thousands of short pieces, requiring computational assembly to reconstruct the full genome. Assembling a complete ancient genome from damaged fragments requires millions of computational comparisons. Across the ancient world, cultures buried their dead with their most valued possessions. For the people of Shaohe, cheese was wealth. It was survival made portable. The internal structure of the cheese revealed layers of fermentation, suggesting it was made in multiple batches, pressed together. The protein degradation patterns confirmed the cheese had been fully fermented before burial, not simply dried milk. The electron microscopy revealed that the bacterial cells themselves were still structurally intact. 3,600 years later, the bacteria that made the cheese were still visible. The preservation was extraordinary, but it also created a scientific opportunity. The 2024 study reconstructed the near-complete genome of the ancient bacterium. By comparing it to modern kefir bacteria, they could track exactly how the microbe had changed. The ancient bacterium had more genes for surviving harsh conditions than modern strains do. Over centuries of controlled fermentation, the bacteria lost genes it no longer needed. Modern dairy production keeps bacteria in constant warmth with steady food supplies. The ancient bacteria needed to survive freezing nights, scorching days, and irregular feeding. Modern strains do not. We bred the toughness out of them, just as we bred wildness out of dogs and cattle. The ephedra twigs buried alongside the cheese were likely used as a stimulant or ritual plant. Dozens of organic specimens from Shaohe remain unanalyzed, each potentially carrying new genetic information. The discovery has drawn international attention to the Shaohe cemetery and the remarkable preservation of its contents. This discovery connects to a much larger story about human evolution and diet. Most humans lose the ability to digest milk sugar after childhood. The Shaohe people were no exception. Their DNA showed they were lactose intolerant. Every single one of them. Dairy residues have been found on pottery from sites across Europe, Africa, and Asia, but none as old as Shaohe. The Shaohe cheese pushes the confirmed history of cheese making back further than any other known site. And yet they were dairy farmers. The cheese explains how. Fermentation breaks down lactose. Kefir cheese contains almost none of the sugar that causes intolerance. These people engineered a way to consume dairy without the genetic mutation required to digest raw milk. Across Central Asia, fermented dairy traditions continue almost unchanged from antiquity. The knowledge passes from generation to generation, just as the kefir cultures pass from batch to batch. The technology came first. The genetic adaptation came later in other populations. Culture solved the problem before biology caught up. That is the real discovery here. The Shaohe cheese has now been studied by teams across 3 continents. It remains the oldest confirmed cheese ever found anywhere on Earth. Museums now display it as evidence of one of humanity's oldest biotechnologies. Cheese making is biotechnology. We have been engineering microbes for thousands of years. The Shaohe cemetery remains one of the most important Bronze Age sites ever excavated in Central Asia. Multiple research teams are now collaborating to analyze additional specimens from the site. 3,600 years ago, someone placed cheese on a loved one's chest and sealed the coffin. They could not have known that the desert air would preserve both the body and the food. They could not have known that scientists would one day read the DNA of the bacteria inside it. But because they buried it with care, we can now trace the oldest food technology on Earth. The desert kept the secret. Science finally opened it. And what they found was cheese. The same cheese we still make today, buried with the dead, preserved by the desert. decoded by science. The oldest cheese on Earth, still telling its story after 36 centuries.